Good evening, world. This is the Propaganda Critic. Today is Sunday, April 20th, 2018. It's about 7:30 p.m. And the topic of discussion for today will be the alleged chemical attack in Syria. This is going to be an unedited video because YouTube decided to get rid of their editing software option, and I don't feel like looking for software right now. So it's effectively a live video, so bear with me. Most of what I'm going to say is going to be scripted, but I may throw in an offhand comment here and there that's not scripted. So let's get started. On 7 April 2018, two organizations, the Syrian American Medical Society Foundation, also known as SAMS, and the Syrian Civil Defense, or the White Helmets, both affiliated with and funded by the West, to include the U.S. State Department and USAID, and with known affiliation to Islamic jihadists such as the Muslim Brotherhood and Jaish al-Islam, reported that a chemical attack had taken place in Douma, a town on the outskirts of Damascus, Syria. While most of the mainstream media just picked up on and ran with this narrative, there is a chorus of voices challenging that narrative, I being one such voice. For the sake of brevity, I will not rehash the official narrative point by point. This has already been done ad nauseum in the mainstream media. My purpose here is to present the narrative that is as consistent with actual evidence as I can manage, which just so happens to run counter to the Western establishment narrative. So I'll start prior to the alleged chemical attack. On Saturday, March 31st, 2018, the Associated Press in Beirut reported that the Syrian army had taken back all of eastern Ghouta with the exception of Douma and declared victory. Additionally, the Syrian government had issued an ultimatum to the jihadists still occupying Douma that they had to leave by late Saturday, 31 March, with a possible extension into Sunday, April 1st, or the government would resume operations there. On Sunday, April 1st, 2018, Al Jazeera also reported on the Syrian army claim to be in control of all of eastern Ghouta, with the exception of Douma, and reported that the head of Jaish al-Islam's political office, Yasser Dilwan, said negotiations with the Syrian government were ongoing, but wouldn't go into detail. Also on this day, Sunday, April 1st, both Syrian state media, Sana, S-A-N-A, and the British-based so-called Syrian Observatory for Human Rights Monitoring Group reported that the Syrian government had finalized an evacuation agreement with the remaining jihadist militants in Douma. They were to be bused to Jarablus, or Jarablus, depending on which source you look at, which borders Turkey and is under the control of Turkish-backed militants, followed by the entry of the Russian military police into Douma and the release of prisoners held by Jaish al-Islam. It appears, however, that not everyone was on board with this deal. Al Jazeera reports that Jaish al-Islam spokesperson Hamza Barakdar said of the militant group, quote, "Our position is consistent and clear. We refuse to be forcibly displaced and demographic change in eastern Ghouta," unquote. Consistent with the reported gains by the Syrian government over the Islamic militants, President Donald Trump, in an April 3rd press briefing, announced his desire to pull troops out of Syria soon, saying, quote, "I want to get out. I want to bring our troops back home. I want to start rebuilding our nation," unquote. As reported by the Los Angeles Times, later that day, Trump met with and ordered his national security team to come up with plans to pull U.S. troops out of Syria and transfer stabilization and rebuilding responsibilities to Gulf Arab allies. Note this position still holds that allowing Russia and Iran to regain influence in the region is not an option. So just 3 days later, on Friday, April 6th, according to a 7 April Press TV report, the Assad government commenced operations in Douma, following its announcement that the terrorist forces there were in violation of an evacuation agreement they had made with the Syrian government. It is here, early the next morning of Saturday, April 7th, when the last remaining Islamic militants in Douma were on the brink of annihilation. The aforementioned NGOs, SAMS and the White Helmets, reported that the Syrian government had conducted a chemical attack on civilians in Douma, a report immediately and uncritically parroted by the Western mainstream media. The evidence presented in support of this claim, however, is unconvincing to say the least. The video taken by the white helmets showing patients being treated and hosed down in the hospital in Douma allegedly show victims of exposure to chemical warfare agents. However, video testimony from 2 medical students who were working at the hospital on that day indicate otherwise. According to the testimony of allege, one of the medical students interviewed, they were treating patients for smoke inhalation caused by a fire which resulted from a building in town being bombed, presumably by the Syrian government forces. While they were treating the patients, he claims, some people rushed in with cameras shouting, quote, chemical, chemical, unquote, and began pouring water on each other, causing a panic. Aziz also stated that the alleged victims were not displaying symptoms of chemical exposure. The other medical student interviewed, Khalil al-Jaish, claims that they were treating patients from a bombing for wounds and symptoms of dust and smoke inhalation when someone rushed in and shouted, quote, chemical attack, unquote. He says, in response to this, people began dealing with patients as victims of a chemical attack, washing them and putting salbutamol inhalers in their mouths. However, they were not medical experts or doctors. Additionally, al-Jaish claims that the hospital did not receive any cases with symptoms of exposure to chemical warfare agents. In addition to the first-hand testimony of these medical students, there were reports from journalists who went to the location of the alleged chemical attacks and also interviewed the local residents. The first Western journalist on the scene following the alleged chemical attack, veteran journalist Robert Fisk of The Independent, reported the testimony of a 58-year-old senior Syrian doctor, Dr. Asim Rahaibani, who works in the underground clinic in Douma, from which the video of the alleged chemical attack victims surfaced. Dr. Rahaibani claimed that the patients brought in were not overcome by gas, but oxygen deprivation in the tunnels and basements in which they lived. He claims that the shelling stirred up a dust storm. Now, it's important to note that Dr. Rahaibani was not a direct eyewitness to these alleged attacks, but he was in the area, and he works at the hospital. He was in the area during the alleged attacks. So, this is a direct quote from him. Let me get a drink. Quote, I was with my family in my basement of my home 300 meters from here on the night, but all the doctors know what happened. There was a lot of shelling, presumably by the Syrian government forces, and aircraft were always over Douma at night. But on this night, there was wind, and huge dust clouds began to come into basements and cellars where people lived. People began to arrive here suffering from hypoxia, oxygen loss. Then someone at the door, a, quote, white helmet, shouted, gas, and a panic began. They started throwing water over each other. Yes, the video was filmed here. It is genuine, but the people you see are suffering from hypoxia, not gas poisoning. Unquote. Fisk also interviewed several civilians in the town who claimed to have never believed in, or quote, never believed in, unquote, the gas stories, claiming that they were propaganda by the armed Islamic groups. Another journalist on the ground in Douma, following the alleged chemical attack, was Pearson Sharp of One America News Network. While in Douma, he visited the hospital where the aforementioned video of victims was filmed, and he visited the town of Douma. While in the town, he interviewed local residents as close to the alleged attack as a block and a half away. Of the 50 or so residents he interviewed in Douma, Sharp reported, quote, none of the people that I spoke to in that neighborhood said that they had seen or heard anything about a chemical attack on that day. Unquote. According to Sharp, all of them believed the chemical attack was staged by the rebels. When he asked why, numerous citizens claimed that they believed it was a desperate ploy by the rebels occupying Douma to get the Syrian government off their back in order that they may escape. Sharp also spoke to a doctor in training who was working at the hospital on the day of the alleged attack, and he corroborates the story of people storming in and yelling that a chemical attack had taken place. So skipping ahead to the OPCW's actions to determine the facts on the ground regarding the chemical attack allegations. There are a few points of controversy I will attempt to address, and I'll start with the information provided by the official statements from the OPCW. or the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, if you don't know what that means. So in his opening statement of the OPCW Executive Council at the 58th meeting, which was on 16 April 2018, the Director General of the OPCW updated the council on, quote, the work of the Technical Secretariat with regards to the allegations of chemical weapons use in Duma, the Syrian Arab Republic, on Saturday, 7 April 2018, unquote. So I'm going to pull from the excerpt of the meeting some of the key pieces of information. So there was an internal discussion for a possible deployment of a fact-finding team to Duma. On Monday, 9 April, the fact-finding mission team comprised of 9 inspectors with relevant expertise was set up. That's 9 April, Monday. On Tuesday, 10 April, the OPCW sent a note to the Syrian delegation notifying them of their decision to deploy the fact-finding mission as early as possible. On the same day that letter was sent, the Syrian delegation submitted to the Secretariat a note requesting that the FFM be dispatched. And then also on that day, the ambassador of the Russian Federation sent a letter to the OPCW supporting that decision by Syria. So a little bit further down, the Director General, is that what he is? Yeah, Director General of the OPCW says, colleagues in the Secretariat and the UN Ops Office in Damascus have been and continue to be in close contact with the UN Department of Safety and Security, or UNDSS, in order to ensure the safety of the FFM team. So the full team received a security briefing from the UNDSS in Beirut on Friday, the 13th of April. And on Saturday, that team proceeded to Damascus, where they met with officials of the National Authority to work out a plan for deployment. I bet you can't guess what else happened on the 14th of April, on Saturday. I'll give you a second. Yeah, that's right. The U.S. and French and UK governments decided to bomb Damascus. So on the day that the OPCW deployed to Damascus is the exact same day that the Western countries bombed Damascus. And, well, suffice to say that the UNDSS wouldn't allow the team to deploy because of security concerns. So I'm going to move on to the 59th meeting, which is a different statement. And some of the highlighted things I have here is the Director General updated the OPCW fact-finding team. And it says, on Monday, I advised, this is the Director General, an exact quote, on Monday, I advised the Council on the work being undertaken by the fact-finding mission team that has been deployed to Damascus to establish the facts on the allegations of chemical weapons use in Duma on 7 April. Okay, so he advised the Council of the decision. This is skipping ahead, still a direct quote, the security for the sites where the FFM plans to deploy was under the control of the Russian military police. The United Nations Department of Safety and Security has made the necessary arrangements with the Syrian authorities to escort the team to a certain point and then for the escort to be taken over by the Russian military police. However, the UNDSS preferred to first conduct a reconnaissance visit without the FFM present. So that's what they decided to do, and that's what they followed through with. FFM team members did not participate in this event. So this is another quote from the statement. Quote, on arrival at Site 1, a large crowd gathered, and the advice provided by the UNDSS was that the reconnaissance team should withdraw. According to the Russians, this was an anti-American bombing protest. At Site 2, this is going back to the quote, at Site 2, the team came under small arms fire, and an explosive was detonated. The reconnaissance team returned to Damascus. So, while it's the consensus of the Western mainstream media that Syria and Russia are the ones responsible for blocking the FFM's mission, in fact, it's the UNDSS not providing approval based on these reconnaissance missions that didn't involve the FFM. However, there's a Russian general who corroborates this statement about there being a firefight at the second location, and this is what he says. Major General Yuri Yevtushenko, the chief of the Russian Center for Reconciliation of Conflicting Sides in Syria, corroborated the reported firefight in Duma, claiming that the Syrian security agencies exchanged fire at the outer security perimeter of the motor convoy. According to Yevtushenko, quote, in the exchange of fire, a Syrian security officer sustained a light wound. Russian servicemen were not present at the site of the incident, unquote. Of note regarding these events and who's responsible, I think it's important to at least bring this to your attention that the head of the UNDSS, who is blocking access to the FFM, the head is Peter Drennan. He's of Australia, which is one of the Five Eye nations, Western nation. To quote the UNDSS official website, quote, Mr. Drennan has represented Australia in national and international policing forums, including Interpol and Asianpol, leading international liaison relationships. He has undertaken postgraduate studies in human resource management and police executive leadership programs with the Australian Institute of Police Management, as well as external programs with the Australian Graduate School of Management and Institution of Company Directors. And here's an important point. He graduated in 2011 from the FBI National Executive Institute program. So that's some food for thought, and I'll try to get into that a little more in my next video. And for now, this concludes part 1 of my 2-part video series on the alleged chemical attack in Duma, Syria. Please like, share, subscribe, comment. You can also reach me on Twitter at Daniel_A_Begley, Begley. Also, if you appreciate the work that I do, please donate. You can find a link to my PayPal account in the description box below. The research that went into making this video took a lot of time and effort, and I need your help to grow my channel and improve my ability to get critical analysis and information out there. Thank you all for watching and listening, and remember, never stop questioning. Peace.